Before we get into this video, we at Medicme are very excited to announce our brand new blog page for you to check out in the description below. We will post many blogs in the future, and our first one on COVID SARS-CoV-2 variants by Selin, which has already been released, is there for you to check out. Back to today's video, we will be looking at the history of the ventilator, from its original developments to the huge impact it has had during this pandemic.
Nowadays, it is all but mandatory for ventilators to be present in the intensive care units of hospitals worldwide. Often regarded as a lifeline for doctors and patients alike, ventilators are used to provide support with breathing, especially to patients struggling to get enough oxygen in their blood. The mechanism is simple, yet very effective. One end of the breathing tube is placed into the airways of a patient's lung through the nose or mouth, known as intubation, whilst the other end is connected to the ventilator. However, if the condition is either very serious or long-term, a procedure called tracheostomy is performed, whereby a small hole in the neck is created during surgery before the breathing tube is connected directly to the windpipe through this hole. Then, by using a positive pressure ventilator mechanism, which we will discuss later, oxygenated air is forced into the lungs. For this to happen, electricity is required to run the ventilator, although there are some types which are powered by batteries. The ventilator has been a medical device that has been in the news very often as of late, primarily with regards to tackling COVID-19, but it can be used for many more conditions and complications. So, how were ventilators first discovered? When is it typically used? And what are the risks associated with it?
Surprisingly, there is some evidence of the use of an artificial ventilator in passages of the Bible, but it wasn't until the late 18th century that physicians of the Royal Humane Society of England began using bellows, a device often used by blacksmiths to furnish a strong blast of air, as the best means of artificial respiration. This is known as a positive pressure ventilation, where air is pushed into the respiratory system. A few decades later, another device, called the Henderson respirator, which later became known as the iron lung, was invented by a young Scottish doctor in the early 1830s. Unlike the bellow, this device functioned using the converse principles of ventilation, negative pressure ventilation. Here, the system changes the air pressure of the environment outside the body, and therefore, to equalize pressure both across the respiratory system and the atmosphere, air would be indirectly forced into and out of the lungs.
With further modifications and improvements, this became the iron lung, which also worked on the theory of negative pressure. In the 1920s, it became a standby in the intensive care unit treatment for children suffering from polio, a viral disease that was capable of causing life-threatening paralysis, and particularly concerned with the respiratory muscles. Given that we are in a pandemic ourselves, we have quickly appreciated the presence of a vaccine to hopefully eradicate coronavirus. But unfortunately, this wasn't the case with polio until the late 1950s, and as a result, more than 3,000 children died from the virus in 1952 alone. Therefore, with little support to turn to, the iron lung, which helped to expand and contract the chest by changing the pressure inside an airtight container, became a necessity for treatment.
Despite these advancements at such an early stage, it is believed that the first modern medical ventilator had only arrived in the 1950s, when former US Army pilot Forrest Bird developed the Bird Mark 7 for their flights at high altitudes, where oxygen will often be required. Since then, however, there have been a lot of progress with the design of ventilators, including better control facilitated by computers. Moreover, research and studies have helped physicians to calculate the optimum level of oxygen that should be delivered into patients' lungs in each breath. For example, a study in 2000 showed that the tidal volume, which is the volume of air that should be forced into the lungs during a particular breath, was shown to be more effective when lower than the volume that machines had been delivering at the time. And so this helped increase the survival rates of patients relying on the ventilator.
Now that we have looked at the history of the ventilator, we will now be discussing the various scenarios in which the ventilator is often in use. As we already discussed, ventilators were used to aid patients suffering from polio, but other conditions that may require the use of a ventilator include amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, coma, brain injury, a collapsed lung, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or known as COPD, drug overdose, lung infections, pneumonia, strokes, and upper spinal cord injuries, in addition to several others. More recently, though, ventilators have been used for the most severe COVID-19 related cases.
However, despite being a life-saving invention, we must appreciate that there is also some risks with being on a ventilator. Above all, the main risk is infection. This is simply because the breathing tube can allow microbes and pathogens to enter the lungs, which can subsequently raise the risk of pneumonia. In addition, sinus infections, which is the swelling of the sinuses, small air pockets located behind the forehead, nose, cheekbone, and between the eyes, are common if a mouth or nose breathing tube is inserted into a patient, and so antibiotics will be required to treat both pneumonia and sinus infections.
There is also the possibility of irritation, as the breathing tube can make it hard to cough, which would otherwise help to remove dust and irritants in the lung. Likewise, patients on a ventilator will be unable to speak due to the breathing tubes passing through their larynx, which is a voice box containing our vocal cords. Therefore, even after use, doctors will regularly ask patients if they are having difficulties breathing or speaking, as it is known that the breathing tube can indeed damage the voice box.
Finally, patients using a ventilator are at risk of lung injury, as the machine can often cause lung damage. This may be down to a number of reasons, including the pressure level in the lungs being too high, pneumothorax, which is where air leaks into the space between the lungs and chest wall, and oxygen toxicity, which is when there is too much oxygen in the lungs. You must bear in mind that there is also the risk of skin infections and blood clots. So, all in all, unless it is absolutely necessary, avoiding the ventilator would be the most ideal scenario, and doctors are well aware of this, which often leads to tough decision making, which we will now consider.
Ventilators can be crucial when a patient is fighting for their life. But one key reason as to why ventilators are not offered to everyone is simply due to a lack of availability. It is estimated that one ventilator approximately costs £18,200, and so hospitals are unlikely to be equipped with several machines within their ICUs. Therefore, doctors are faced with an ethical dilemma: who should be prioritized first? And this leads us nicely onto this week's debate.
This week, we will be considering the following scenario. Let's suppose that there are two patients critically ill with coronavirus, a young university student and a nurse working at the hospital. Of these two, who should get the ventilator? I firmly believe that the nurse working at the hospital is the one who should get the ventilator. My initial reason for this is due to the fact that the nurse is currently working at a hospital and therefore she can save many lives from the COVID pandemic. Because of her use and her sacrifice she's making, I believe it's just and most efficient for her to be the one who receives the ventilator and not the university student.
That's a good point, Darren. But if the patients needing a ventilator arrive at the hospital at different times, I would probably give it to the first patient who enters. I'll then transfer the other patient to another hospital with available ventilators. However, if both patients do indeed arrive at the same exact time, I would probably give it to the university student. This is because, since the university student is probably younger than the nurse, he will have a better immune system and therefore be more likely to survive. I'll then transfer the nurse to another hospital with available ventilators.
While I fully understand his justification and the points he made, Rohan, I still believe that the nurse should be the one who receives the ventilator. My justification is that the nurse most likely contracted COVID-19 from her job in the hospital where she's saving lives every day. And therefore, I think it's cool and almost ironic that the one who saves people from COVID-19 every day is the one who's not saved herself. And this is not right, in my opinion.
That's a great point, Darren. And with that, that's the end of this debate. If you guys have any opinions, please do share them in the comment section down below. The world of medicine has seen many groundbreaking discoveries, but we think it is fair to say that the ventilator is there with some of the greatest inventions. To acknowledge the huge impact that ventilators have had on the effort to save lives, particularly during these difficult times, we'd like to leave you with the following quote from an American astrologer and scientist, Carl Sagan. Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as we'll be posting more videos in the future. We also have an Instagram and Twitter page, so make sure to follow them as we'll be posting content on there in the future as well. And again, thank you for watching.